Growing up in the church, I knew a lot about God, but I did not know God.
Yeah.
So I got saved in a very unique kind of a situation. The Brownsville revival, 1995, God poured out His Spirit.
Yeah.
I know you know it very well. In a church in the middle of nowhere, and 4 million people came through the doors in 4 years.
Wow.
Without one advertisement, no Facebook,
Yeah.
none of this.
Yeah.
It was word of mouth, God is here.
Yeah.
People were getting saved driving by. People were getting saved in the parking lot. People were getting saved just because of the nearness of God. There was a gospel being preached from the pulpit, but the presence of God was already arresting people's hearts before they would bow their knees, even in the line before getting into the church. I mean, they were lining up at 6 a.m. to get into the 7 p.m. service.
Wow.
And they had to make a rule that you can't line up before that because people were just sleeping on the lawn.
Wow.
So it was a very unique situation. I don't know of anything like it since.
Yeah.
My mom tricked me to go, and she said, you can bring your girlfriend, who's not my wife. So this is 1996, and I waited in line all day long, complaining the entire time.
Yeah.
When I walked through the door, I walked into the tangible presence of God, literally the glory.
You literally felt
immediately. It was undeniable.
Wow.
Like tangible glory. You know how the scripture talks about the glory of God, and the glory of God can be best defined as His manifest presence.
Yeah.
In other words, His presence able to be perceived, sensed.
Wow.
And that's exactly what I stepped into. I stepped into God.
Wow.
And I was ready to give my life to Jesus immediately. And I got filled with the Spirit in that environment. I say that because you asked how the journey began.
Yeah.
Because it began so uniquely, my journey started uniquely and remained unique in this. It was presence of God centered.
Yeah.
I was saved because of a direct encounter with the presence of God, tangibility of God.
Yeah.
And so the course of my life, I have found that because I was born that way, I have sought to live that way. I remember one person said, I think it was J.I. Packard, who said, what you bring them to, you save, or whatever you save them with is what they're saved in. So basically, however a person meets the Lord determines how they're going to walk out with the Lord.
Wow.
And that's exactly how it was with me. It was presence of God, so I wanted to walk in His presence.
Wow.
So I began to shut my door of my room, just like all of us pretty much did, and just find Him over and over again, specifically meaning looking for the tangibility of His presence and just sustaining that sweet sense of His presence. So my quest in life was, I want to live aware of His presence. I remember reading things by Charles Spurgeon, who said something like that his goal in life was to live in unbroken communion with God. And I said to myself, that's it. That's what I want.
Yeah.
And so years and years of just locking away in the room and failing and locking and failing and locking and failing brought me to realize that I am completely unable to do this thing myself. And it took a lot, even to this day, I'm learning over and over again, I can't do this. It's not possible to resolve myself into anything. It has to be a complete abandonment to Him, and then His presence can come in as His Spirit and perform the thing Himself. And so this is how it began, this is how it was sustained, this is what interests me to this day. I don't have an interest in anything really else than just enjoying His person and His presence. Yeah.
Was there a time where prayer switched from you from being like just a list of things to check off into spending time with Him? How did that happen?
Yeah, so when it began, it was all about His presence. But just as the human mind is, you think to yourself, it can't possibly be this good. I've got to do something.
Right.
And so my mind would fight against faith. Logic would fight against faith. How does that even look like? I would say it can't just be surrender and God does everything. I have to do something here. And so that would filter into my prayer time, and I would begin to add things that I felt would that God wanted from me, that He never really wanted from me. I'll give you an example. I felt like I needed to pray hard. I felt like I needed to cry out and try to make something happen, because I was like, I got to be doing my part here. not realizing the entire time and coming again and again to this same revelation that it is all Him.
Yeah.
And it has to remain all Him,
Yeah.
or we mix it, we dilute it.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you're striving and struggling.
Yeah.
But I've learned over and over again, I'm still learning this again and again and again, that it is not about struggling, it's about snuggling. So if we snuggle, we won't struggle.
Yeah.
And our struggling comes from a lack of snuggling.
Wow.
And so I would say that it was always an issue in my brain to relinquish everything to Him, because I wanted to have a part in it. There's something about man that he wants to make this thing work.
Yeah.
If you look all throughout the New Testament and even the Old Testament, what's constantly being addressed is, listen, guys, God is the only one who is able to do this. You guys keep waywarding yourselves. You're literally going off into multiplicities. And He has called us to just the simplicity of His person. And so for me, it was this, and still is to this day, even this morning when I sat with the Lord, I went through a bunch right here in my brains. It's like, I got to make something happen. And then I have to retract and say, no, you have done it. You are what it's about. And so prayer now is not a list.
Yeah.
Prayer is not a performance. Prayer is literally sustaining attentiveness to His person.
Wow.
And if I can leave it right there, then He's free.
Yeah.
He's free to lead me however He wishes. If He wants me to pray into something, then this person comes in and leads me. A lot of times I think person is replaced by practice.
Yeah.
And this makes sense.
That's so good.
To us,
Yeah.
because of our brains,
Yeah.
it makes sense. Practice is what we think. If you go to any religious person, even Christians, you ask them what their Christianity looks like, the first thing they're going to say is they're going to begin to describe their practice, their disciplines, instead of attentiveness to a person who's real.
Yeah.
And it's really a lack of faith that He really is who He says He is, and He's able to do what He said He can do.
Yeah.
And so I come every day to this crossroad. Am I going practice or am I going person? And I can feel when I start going practice, I start losing the sweet sense of His person, and it becomes something that I've got to maintain. I've got to strive to make happen. But when I turn to person, oh man, everything is different. It's like bliss is the best way I can describe it. The fulfillment of all desire coming through my entire being. And I feel so satisfied. I don't have a need for anything else. I have found that His presence continually frees me from the need to have anything else. And this is freedom. Because it's all these needs that we love to cling to because they make sense.
Right.
But God doesn't make natural sense.
Yeah.
I agree.
Talk to us about the rest, and how do you rest in God in that way?
Yeah, it's interesting you say this, because just yesterday, the Lord was reminding me about Jacob in Genesis chapter 28. I know you guys know the story well, but there's a couple of interesting things they just kind of stand out to me. You know how when you're reading the scriptures, something just kind of is like a little higher than the rest? You're like, whoa, I don't know why, but I need to give attention to this. I found those are like doors. And if you'll give attention to them, you can pass through them into Him.
Wow.
A lot of times what happens with people is they just read them, they're like, oh, and they just keep going. But if we stop, we can pass through it by giving attention to His person in the text. So what happened with me yesterday was Jacob is in this certain place. The Bible says that he lays his head upon a rock, and then he goes to sleep. And while he's sleeping, he sees. And what does he see? He sees angels ascending and descending. And what's above the angels ascending and descending is the Lord Himself. And then as he sees the Lord Himself, the voice of the Lord comes out. And then he says at the end, the Lord was here and I didn't even know it. And it hit me that many times, I won't even say many times, all the time, God is here. He's with us. But we don't even recognize it. And here's the reason why I believe we don't recognize it. Jacob laid his head on a rock. Who's the rock of our salvation? Jesus. So when we rest our head upon the Lord, that means giving our attention to Him, and we close our eyes to this world, our eyes will open in the next world. And we'll be able to see angels ascending and descending, or in other words, the kingdom activity. But what's far above all that is the person of the Lord. He's above the angels' activity. And so when we give attention to the person of the Lord, then we hear the voice of the Lord. And as we hear his voice and see him and experience him in the place of rest because he's sleeping, then we can come to know the Lord and we'll say, he's here. And I didn't even recognize it. So I would break it all down like this. If we'll give attention to the Lord, close our eyes to this world, and go into rest, our eyes will open.
Wow.
And we'll see
So good.
and perceive and know him. Matthew chapter 6, verse 6. Jesus speaks to us about prayer. And he says, when you pray, go into your most private room and closing the door, pray to your Father who sees in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you in the open. This actual text is what the entire course is going to be driving home. We must spend time with God. We're going to talk practically about how to experience him, experiencing and enjoying God from the scriptures. Thank you so much for signing up. I know the Lord is going to do something incredible in your life.